My whole feed used to be just memes, and all my friends and I would ever send to each other on Instagram, say, was just different memes, and it's how we communicated. Sometimes I would go days without speaking to that friend other than through the medium of memes, which now looking back is really funny. And I've deleted my personal Instagram and stuff, so I no longer do this, but it was something I really enjoyed, and there was something in the spirit of memes that you can't replicate in just ordinary language. So today we're going to discuss the culture of memes, and we're going to discuss this through the movement, the Dada movement from 1916 to I think it was 1924. So a very short movement that led to other movements. But we're going to talk about how it came to be and what the common grounds are between our current culture and the culture at the time of the Dada movement. The podcast as a whole is now called Josephine and no longer The Overthinker, and I want it to be more streamlined and look more at contemporary art as a way of analysing our current culture, our way of living, and I want to look at art history, art theory, and social and political issues that go alongside all of these things. I hope this sounds interesting to people. It's certainly interesting to me. It's what I studied. It's more my areas of expertise, and I'd love to share that all with you guys. So yes, introducing the new podcast, Josephine, or the new brand of podcast, Josephine. So before memes and before TikTok edits and all the doom scrolling and stuff, there was Dada. And as I said, it started in 1916 and lasted just under 10 years. In 1916 in Zurich, the world was collapsing under the weight of World War I. And in a tiny cabaret called Voltaire, a group of artists and poets met in the middle of the night to collaborate and create, where ripping up newspapers, creating collages, and reading poems made of absolutely random syllables started to generate this new movement known as Dada. Supposedly after stabbing a penknife into a French-German dictionary, they stumbled on the word Dada, which in Romanian means yes, yes, and in French means hobby horse. It was a joke name that didn't have a meaning, which represented the fact that Dadaism also doesn't really have a meaning, or its meaning is that it's meaningless. And I often think about this in terms of when I come to write these essays here, and someone actually asked me how I go about it, and they are very chaotic. I find that creativity can often be quite chaotic, and my notes often look like this fragment of quotes and different ideas, a collage, kind of like Dadaism, a collage of all things, which eventually will have a meaning in the end. But to try and stabilize my days and make sense of all of this, I have been using Craftsty, which is the sponsor of today's video. And in particular, I've been listening to a video called Journal Writing 101, where the instructor discusses writing as a way of organizing our thoughts. And one of the main things that I've picked up is that we should, the night before, think of 3 different things we want to complete the next day and do them at the very start of the day. And there's something meditative about it too, which I find also really important for me. Like I'm archiving my ways of thinking. And if you want your own version of that, maybe through writing or through art, painting, drawing, Craftsty offers a whole range of courses with over 2,000 classes across everything from painting, baking, knitting, and tons of other things. You can join Craftsty and start creating today too. Either go to the link or use the QR code on screen to get your first full year of Craftsty for only $1.49. And this is for new members only. So that's access to thousands of classes, new projects every month, and a whole community of makers to learn alongside. So thank you so much, Craftsty, for sponsoring this video. So as I was saying, Dadaism isn't about complete nonsense. It was about protest. It was born from the horrors of World War I, from a generation that no longer trusted in reason and logic. If reason had built the machine gun, if logic had led to slaughter, then perhaps absurdity was the only honest thing that there was left. And Dadaism wasn't about making sense. It was about showing that sense itself had become meaningless. And artists like Hugo Ball, Tristan Tzara, and Hans Arp wrote these kind of sound poems, as I was saying, that are syllables stripped entirely of their logic. And Ball liked to recite these poems in costume, and he would dress in almost a priestly-like costume that was made of cardboard and cardboard tubes. And then there are others like Marcel Duchamp, who you probably know by his famous ready-made work, which was a urinal called Fountain, but the object itself is actually just a urinal, a porcelain urinal with Marcel's signature on the side. His fountain declared that art wasn't in the object itself, but in the choice to call it art. And he was really trying to dissect what it is that makes art art. But while Duchamp became the radical face of this new spirit of art, there is another artist I'm particularly interested in, and she has a very long name. So for the sake of this essay, and for the sake of this podcast, we're going to call her Elsa, but her name is Elsa Von Freytag-Loringhoven, or Haven, and she was also known as the Baroness. She was absolutely unlike anyone else in the New York avant-garde scene at the time, and she wore like tomato cans as earrings, and instead of wearing makeup, she would put postage stamps on her face as like face jewelry, I guess, or kind of a version of makeup. And she really lived Dada as life and not just as theory, and not just represented in her artwork. She made this work called A Portrait of Marcel Duchamp, and this wasn't like a portrait that you typically think of. It wasn't representative in the way that portraits usually are. Instead, it was somewhat of a parody. It was basically an assemblage of found objects and pipes, meant to mock the masculine rationality of her friend's cool conceptualism. And her infamous work called God, which was a cast iron plumbing trap mounted onto a wooden base, has this real raw and almost bodily and erotic element under the fact that it is machine. So it kind of mixed the organic feel of body with the machine of it being a pipe or plumbing trap. And in contrast to Duchamp's work, his work was much more detached. Elsa's work is feral, particularly the work God, as it collides the industrial and the bodily together. And many historians actually argue whether Marcel Duchamp was the creator of his work Fountain, or whether it was actually made by Elsa. I couldn't see if there was a direct answer, but most people seem to sway to the idea that Marcel was the creator of the Fountain. And I don't think her work was simply parody. I think it was exposure. She really stripped the world at that time of its politeness and of its hierarchy and of its purity. She really blurred gender, eroticism, and material in ways that still feel, I think, quite radical even today. Like if I saw one of her sculptures, I wouldn't necessarily think it's from over 100 years ago. And Elsa really took Dadaism to not just mean anti-art, but to also mean anti-order. And like I said, she embodied this in her life in the way she presented herself. There was this refusal to be logical, to be able to be categorized. And then going back to this idea of the meme, there is an artist called CEMA, and I'm just going to call him Chem A. But he also has an Instagram called freeze_magazine. And it's a play on words on the institution slash art magazine called Freeze, which is FRIEZE. And his Instagram is basically a critical analysis of the current consumption culture within the art world. And he displays this criticism through the use of memes. And I found this interview with freeze_magazine, Chem A. I found this article on the art newspaper where he basically said he turned to memes because he was disillusioned with the current London art world. He disliked its exclusivity and its real coded use of language, and it's just, I guess, elitism and pretension, which actually is quite distant from real life. And the whole point of art is to sort of reflect and be inclusive and reflect life. And like Hugo Ball and Elsa, Chem A really uses absurdity to mock or to, I guess, critique the current culture. He uses nonsense as a form of resistance. His memes are kind of like a digital Dada, and they mock the self-seriousness of art institutions, but they also reveal the same existential confusion that fueled the original Dada movement. And he actually even references theories, conspiracy theories, such as the one about the fountain by Duchamp and whether it was actually made by Elsa. But his memes are these sharp critical diagnostics, and they expose how irony and absurdity has become this new shared language in the current culture. Perhaps it's the only way we can process this emotionally numb and information overloaded world we live in. And there's a specific meme that he posted, which is of a woman talking to this man, and it says, are you more concerned about the painting behind glass or our planet and people? And the guy basically replies saying that she's talking nonsense. And then in the next line on the meme is the man looking at this painting by Rauschenberg. And this painting by Rauschenberg is actually a erasure painting of Willem de Kooning's work. So it's a painting by de Kooning that Rauschenberg has erased and now is claiming as his piece of work. And he was using this meme to criticize the fact that when activists, like climate activists, I think they threw oil paint, they threw cans of oil onto various classical paintings, trying to destroy them and, I guess, create attention around climate issues. People were more concerned about the paintings than they were concerned about what the message the people who threw the oils, what the message that the people who threw the oil on the paintings were trying to say. And he, I think in this meme, is trying to expose the fact that we are more obsessed with the artwork itself and not what the artwork is actually trying to do. But Rauschenberg's gesture, just like Dadaism and like memes, asks us to see that undoing itself is the meaning. To erase is to reveal what we actually value. And meme culture does this constantly. It edits, it distorts, it copies and pastes, but not out of disrespect, as a way of reinterpreting and re-enlivening previous images. And something I want to be aware of when we're talking about all of this is something that the critic Hal Foster brings up time and time again. And I just read his book, What Comes After Farce. And he basically, this is a very dense read, a very dense book. I am only 3 essays in, and this is only 160 pages, but it takes a long time to get through each essay because there's a lot packed in here, but I do recommend it. You can also find more on Hal Foster. I've just found like his seminars and lectures on YouTube even. And Foster argues that the avant-garde's once absurd, ironic, shocking kind of gestures have become completely absorbed by capitalism. The very strategies meant to resist meaning now produce it as a commodity. And in Dada's time, absurdity was protest. But in our time, absurdity is linked to algorithms. And what was once linked to anti-bourgeoisie is now seen as a form of brand identity. Our irony is monetized and our humor is turned into data. And this is the tension that Chem A also plays with. Can memes still resist when they exist inside the very system that they mock? And Foster's warning is that we now live in an age of reflexive irony. And this is where critique becomes style. And meaning collapses not into revolution, but into an endless self-referencing. So I guess the question is digital Dadaism still resistant? Or is it just more slop on our feeds? And I even think about this in terms of me making this video here, how much of it is actually critique or how much of it is just my brand identity and what I'm choosing to display through an algorithm through YouTube. And I think like it depends on the quality and the value of the criticism that I'm putting out there, but it's all very intertwined together. And I don't think there's like a full-on direct answer, but it's one that I do think about quite a lot. And there is a piece I found in Plaster magazine, which I really recommend as an art magazine. There's lots of great articles on there, and they describe the phenomenon of brainrot, the hypersaturated and contextless humour of the internet. But we all contain multitudes, and brainrot is no exception. As a medium, brainrot is intentionally absurd, contextless, fast-paced, a total parody of the internet culture itself, drawing comparisons to another 20th century art movement, Dadaism. With no coherent narrative, its bombardment of emotionally saturated content is precision engineered for digital stimulation, with meme culture as its necessary pretext. What makes brainrot so funny is the surreal vibe it gives off, which I would argue sets it apart from what artist Daniel Keller has called slopetism, which is defined as low-effort, often meaningless content that prioritizes the production of attention as its own commodity, from grifters trying to make a quick buck to politicians wanting to overwhelm the system with AI cringe edits of themselves as Star Wars characters. So I think that basically there's this kind of fine line between what is actually slop and what is actually a good critique and a good criticism of the times. And I think that this article was also trying to warn us against what at first could be considered critique could quickly slip into becoming like low effort, attention farming, commodified nonsense. And the difference here is commodified. There's a difference between digital Dada and digital despair. And maybe this is whether the absurdity still carries with it its original intention. Is it confronting us or just merely numbing us? So I think that in general, meme culture does hold with it this intention of criticism, but not always. And I think you can tell the difference in slop versus actual critique, and where digital Dadaism is actually present and where digital despair is more the order of the day. But either way, I just find this such an interesting talk, and it's quite fun to talk about meme culture in this really serious, critical way. I really hope you enjoyed this episode of what is now called Josephine. Don't forget, it's now called Josephine. I want to continue making these videos about art theory a bit more, and I think this is like a direction I'd be really happy and interested in going in, and I'd hope you would come along for the journey of that. Yeah, if you have any feedback, please write in the comments below. Equally, you know, let's discuss this more. Please let me know your thoughts, and I will see you all again next time.